Hello and welcome to another fully live episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Kody KIlian. I'm a security researcher at Varonis, and today we have my good friend and fellow hacker KIlian on to talk about the hacker news of the week. KIlian, thank you for joining us again.
Hello, great to be back. This is I think we've fallen into a groove again here a little bit after the tumultuous few months of conference travel. Seems like we're doing all right.
We have, but just wait, because as soon as I go to tour camp, I'm going to be in the middle of nowhere trying to stream from the woods. So I guess we'll see how that goes. Although I've seen a lot of cool radio projects, so maybe there will be a way. In fact, I saw a couple years ago, they did their own cell network, which is pretty cool and interesting. So I feel like I'm going to learn a lot about infrastructure when I go to tour camp later this month. I also made something, KIlian. So on the last version of the stream, I was talking about this thing that I made. I'm going to reveal it real quick. It's this signal tester, and the idea is I attached a GPS to this LoRa backpack, and I wanted to see how much of an impact changing things around, like the antenna or like the orientation, had on signal. So depending on whether it has this little wire antenna that I crafted or it has a little pigtail antenna that I bought from Adafruit, I wanted to see if that really impacted the signal. So it would send its GPS signal over, and then I had the other receiver connected to my computer, and I was using an HID library to make it think that it was a keyboard, and it would literally type out the message it received plus the signal strength that it had received it and send it to me on Signal, but basically via text. So I was able to go to different places, press the button, have it send a message back to my house, and then it would text me the received signal strength, and I could actively swap out antennas, try different orientations. It was really, really cool. So I wanted to take the next step on this and kind of apply it to tour camp, which is coming up really soon. So I wanted to take the same setup and make it into something that would allow people from across the camp to potentially change the colors on a really big, tall tower of lights. So, okay, I'm going to disable this. And behind me, I have, there we go. I'm big on this one. You can see this string of lights, and this is against like basically wrapped around a light stand. But I have this transmitter here, and I have programmed it with CircuitPython to send over random color values. So it currently is like a hex value. It's a red, green, blue value. And this is going to create random ones, send it over this LoRa radio with this handy tiny wire antenna that I crafted and put on here, which actually seems pretty effective. And the idea is that I should be able to have this changing rapidly. And ideally, if anybody, once we finish this, wanted to change the way that it looked at the camp, it would be really easy for them to then affect it, even from like a mile away. So if somebody wanted to send us like a signal from their camp to come over, they could change this green or something, and we'd know. So creating ways for people to interact with each other and creating like a basic receiver that can just get generic transmissions from anybody who has a LoRa radio, is going to be really cool, because people can make it go rainbow. They can change a lot of stuff with it that we haven't even anticipated yet. So I worked, on basically creating a Philips Hue light over the course of last night. And the idea is, again, it just picks a random color and then transmits it to a strip, which I'm going to hoist super, super tall and then diffuse so it can be seen from the entire campsite. So that's just the foundation of one of the crazy things I'm making for this upcoming camp. But it's going to be really cool. So yeah, very excited to make a little bit of random tech last night.
Now, very important question from the audience. Have you implemented a backdoor for the CIA in case they want to make it red?
Oh, of course. There's plenty of Easter eggs, and we'll call them deliberate bugs in my code, which could allow you to do all sorts of things that you're not supposed to do. I don't have any exec functions that just take raw input and just execute them, but I'm tempted to include them just so you guys might be able to run some of your own code here. Because I don't know if you guys are going to take up my receiver nugget at the top of a pole. It's going to be annoying for me to hoist down and then put up a new one, but I got 100 of them, so you can keep it coming. I don't care. Nice. It's there to be broken. So yeah, tour camp, I've mentioned it a couple times, coming up super soon, and it seems to be all about art. We're going to be having a big installation there, and it's going to be really cool to see everybody who's coming both to our workshops, which are officially on the schedule, and also coming by the campsite we're going to set up. We're going to have as many blinky lights as we can possibly power, so we'll see how that goes, especially because we might actually not have access to power, so we might be running them off of power banks when we get there. So it's going to be really cool on an island, and apparently kind of cold at night, so yeah, getting ready for that, and it's going to be a little bit of a difference from what I'm doing right now. So
sure.
All right. Some other things to cover this week. One of them is actually a piece of bad news that I was alerted to on Twitter, as a lot of bad news comes to me. This was from Eva, who works at the EFF, and this is about the Stanford Internet Observatory being dismantled. So this is something that I'd cited before, a lot for their research into how like political parties are using social media, and basically how like propaganda and other misinformation is being spread, and what extent it has an effect on people. And this is something that was desperately needed at the time. And it seems as though there has been a sustained pressure campaign to kind of discredit or like selectively like leak information from these organizations after they've been subpoenaed in Congress, which has damaged the credibility and made it a lot harder for them to find funding. The litigation that this has also sparked from a lot of people who don't agree with the results of some of this research, let's say people who might be implicated in spreading misinformation, maybe, I don't know, has cost the university millions of dollars. So at a certain point, it's become more trouble than it's worth for them to provide this, I would almost call it like a public service that keeps an eye on the public discourse when it comes to misinformation, propaganda, and other sorts of kind of abuses of social platforms. So I'm really disappointed to see this happen, because they were one of the impartial voices that was doing real legitimate research into this sort of thing that's spreading more rampantly. So aside from cybercrime, this also obviously impacts the ability of people who have access to vast amounts of AI tools or other things to have a giant disproportionate say in the public discourse. So I think it's really interesting to make sure that that sort of thing is being monitored in some way, shape, or form. And at the moment, it seems like it really might not have a chance to continue anymore. Yes, sorry, my power is going out, so I'm putting in a new outlet. All right, so I think the other thing that I wanted to highlight actually is about a piece of news that we were already covering. So I wanted to give a shout out to a camp that I truly, truly wish I could go to, but wasn't able to make this year. And that is EMF camp. Kilian, have I mentioned EMF camp to you before?
I feel like we did talk about it. I don't remember if it was on a stream or if it was at like when we were at RSA or something like that, but I feel like we did talk about it.
So this seems to be like the European version of Tour Camp, and it seems amazing. There was so much cool stuff here. I've drawn a lot of inspiration from all of that, and I think the best overview I've seen of just what it looks like, I'm going to mute this for myself, is this little like tour that people did through the center of it on these tiny little, what are these, Kilian? I don't know what to call them.
They remind me of like the little kids, like the Power Wheels things you get, but like sort of go-karty. Yeah,
like a little like kids go-kart. So you can see here, this is like a pitch tent kind of village. A lot of people come here and just like set up their own villages with blinky lights and other things to attract people. That's exactly what we're planning on doing. This is, again, our first time doing anything like this. So EMF camp has been something that's been recommended to me for such a long time. And this is going to be smaller, I believe, than EMF camp. But this is my greatest regret of the year so far, is not being able to attend EMF camp and get to go to a conference that is not just a conference in like a big conference center in Las Vegas or something, but actually a space where the attendees have total control over the layout and the infrastructure, or lack thereof, as it appears here.
Right. I'm not going to lie. I just want to drive these little carts around, like Mario Kart, like rally style, getting wild with it.
That seems to be exactly what's happening here, Kilian, and I'm so desperately sad that I don't have my own to enter the race. Like, because this is like race 4, which implies multiple other races. So primarily, I'm using this video to spy on campers to show me their best light diffusers, so I can, maybe make a run to Home Depot and improvise some. Is that a Cybertruck? It's a tiny Cybertruck. I hate it. Wow. Yeah, that was amazing. But anyway, so that's a little kind of like look into the kinds of thing that's going to be happening at Tour Camp. And again, something that I truly wish I could have gone to. Some friends of mine were able to go, and my friend Vic actually was there. So I might have to ask her how that went and how much fun it was. But I think I know the answer. It probably went great, and it was probably a lot of fun. So, all right. So I want to just mention one interesting thing. I like new tech when it comes out, and the new messages via satellite feature on iPhones was really interesting to me. I was like, is it Starlink? Like, what is going on? So I did a little bit of a dive onto it. And Kilian, I'm curious, have you heard of this feature? Or like, have you tried it? Are you aware of like what it's supposed to be able to do?
I'm aware of it. I'm not an iPhone user, but it is an interesting feature. Because I think they for a while had the like SOS thing where you could at least like alert law enforcement or something if you were in trouble. But I think now, if I'm not mistaken, they're expanding it to be able to send other types of messages to other people. I think, like I said, I didn't follow it super closely, but
yeah, so I did some digging, and it seems like I couldn't find the things I really wanted to know, like how many emergency messages can you send, like what specifically can you put in those messages. I did find that they developed like some sort of way of compressing the information, which doesn't sound like crazy to me. Where you can basically let people know your GPS information, your current status, what's happened to you, and basically you fill out a quick survey. It compresses it into like a very, very short transmission, and then you got to hold up your iPhone and basically point it around until it like buzzes and tells you, okay, you're pointing at the satellite, and then you just got to chill for like a minute to 5 minutes while it transmits and communicates, and hopefully is able to give you like a status update via the same incredibly low transmission rate thing. What I'm interested in is, this is not Starlink. This is not something that's going to be a lower orbit and higher data rate. This is geostationary, like kind of, I hate to say like old school, but like kind of more traditional like satellite links that are much, much, much further away. And it's interesting to me that all this energy has been put into developing like an antenna for that, so that you can reach the satellite like way, way out there in geostationary orbit, when there's like, closer, faster satellites that like might be able to provide coverage. Like it's kind of a conscious choice here. And it seems like Apple like deliberately chose to go with like satellite providers that are like, like maybe not ideal for like long-term, like anything other than like a short questionnaires worth of communication between you and some loved ones, or emergency providers. So kind of interesting to me, because like it seems like, maybe they could have gone with another satellite network, but they chose to instead do geostationary, which I don't know. It's an interesting choice, but it doesn't seem, again, like there's any hard limits currently set on this. And it does say that it's free for, I think, like 2 years. And after that, there's no pricing that's been announced. I was really interested. I was just like, could I make this into some sort of C2 server? Like, is there a way to use this compressed information to like, I don't know, like do something really interesting? I don't know yet, I guess is the answer. But I'm keeping an eye on it. And as phones are able to generally potentially access or at least communicate with satellite networks, like that certainly opens up some cool possibilities, although probably not on a stock iOS device, unfortunately.
I wonder though, if they're building it in, I wonder if they will open this up in their like APIs, their app APIs. If you download like the dev kit for an iPhone. I haven't looked at that in ages, but I wonder if they're going to open it up for other apps to be able to use, or if it's going to be closed.
I feel like because it's a third party, like they probably have like a deal with like Iridium or like whatever satellite provider, like Garmin or whoever has satellites up there. Like they probably have a deal for a certain amount of data transmission, and like they're just desperately trying to keep it below that amount, like at any cost. That like if you start messing with it, I feel like someone will just call you, or like if you start like doing non-traditional stuff, I feel like they'd be like, "Hi, we noticed that your like satellite data bucket is 10,000 times higher than our highest other user." Like, we'd like to ask you, maybe like, are you lost a lot? Like, are you constantly in distress? Like, what are you transmitting? Who knows? All right. So next up, we have I think probably my favorite headline. So we've talked about CISA, our favorite federal agency, which also has a number of wonderful stickers, some of which are currently on my laptop. They apparently are having a bit of an impersonation scam. So now that they are well known, they have been a victim of their own good branding. And enough people have heard of them that getting a call from CISA telling them that their computers are infected, they have to fix it, and being perhaps a little stern about it, is not something outside the realm of possibility. Again, that perhaps a victim of their own good branding and success. So CISA is now warning that criminals are calling businesses and being like, hey, you're out of compliance. You need to send us $500 in Bitcoin and or gift cards in order to come back into compliance, because your bank accounts are frozen, so you can't send us the money via normal means. Just wild stories. And people are the victim of this all the time. Business owners are typically the target of this, or people who have the ability to disperse funds, but maybe aren't the business owner. So if you get an angry federal agency you've heard of before calling you and telling you that you're so far out of compliance that you're about to go to jail, or whatever pressure tactic they're using, then that's a pretty good indication that it's a scam. But a lot of people might feel the urgency of that situation, might not want to get in trouble, like might be nervous about being in compliance anyway. or know that something maybe is out of compliance. So there's often online scanners that are able to make it so you can find, running instances of a vulnerable piece of software. So if you can confirm that something's vulnerable and then find the contact info for that person, pretending to be a federal agency that's, trying to get them to be in compliance, like, is not the most ridiculous thing to pretend to be. So these scams have evolved over a long period of time, and seeing them now pretending to be feds is pretty incredible. I'm not sure if that enhances the crime or if it's like an additional charge or what it is. It's just super bold to pick a federal agency as the group that you're impersonating when it comes to the kinds of fraud that we've seen over a long period of time. So I think we were talking about an effort in Japan to have tech support gift card section and other things that were commonly associated with fraud, so that when people bought those and tried to come up to the front and pay for them, instead they got taken aside and triage to see if they were falling for a scam. These are so common that it kind of affects everyone, and seeing CISA now targeted as somebody who is being impersonated in these scams, pretty crazy.
So some solid advice for anybody in the US. Typically speaking, the federal government's never going to call you. It's always going to be done via letter, legitimately, or if it's something serious enough, they'll have somebody serve you, somebody actually come and serve you papers, essentially. But yeah, they're not going to call you. Letters. Always the federal mail.
Gift cards, Pokemon cards. They're not going to ask for cryptocurrency. They're just not going to ask for that stuff. So CISA will pretty much never demand payment. And that's something to remember. So yes, most federal agencies except the IRS will. Okay, that's not true. I don't want to give criminals ideas. I'm going to stop making a list of plausible ways of contacting people on the stream. All right.
Yeah, so the IRS, you have to pay your taxes with Pokemon cards. Didn't you hear that? New rule.
Yes, they've recently made changes. You must go to your local store and send them to me directly, says the 9-year-old hacker. All right, so next up we have a relatively good story, but I wanted to note one interesting part of this. So Google has patched a number of zero-day vulnerabilities on their Pixel devices. That basically means that because Pixel devices are patched much sooner than a lot of other Android devices, that could generally mean that all of these other devices are actually vulnerable and are going to get patches later, because the carrier has to integrate and then bundle and then put out their own update. I am a Pixel enjoyer, so that means I've probably got this update, but the trigger for this was a forensics company. So apparently people were attempting to use Graphene OS with tools like Wasted and Sentry, which wipe the device when detecting an attack. And this zero-day vulnerability was used to get access to the device anyway. So these are paranoid individuals who are probably, if I was to wager a guess, under some sort of law enforcement prosecution, and a government or somebody else is paying these forensics firms to exploit these zero-day vulnerabilities and get evidence against these people in court. Yeah, just kind of reading between the lines here.
Sure.
So there's kind of a couple of driving factors between these emergency updates. One of them is nation states and that sort of thing. Another one is going to be more like forensics or mercenary companies that instead are trying to make money off of these 0 days desperately in targeted ways. And some of them may be perfectly allowed to do so because they're working with the federal government. So, relatively uninteresting exploits that were kind of covered here. They're the same kind of thing we've seen exploited all the time. But the fact that they were targeted at hardened versions of Android is really what's notable here. So Graphene OS only really runs on Pixel devices, and that seems to have been the target here. So these hardened devices are difficult to get at when they're set up properly, and exploiting 0 days is really the only way of doing so. So that's really like a paranoid person's worst nightmare. Like, you spent all this time and energy like making your system hardened, and then there's just some random 0 day vulnerability you don't know about that the government has enough money to purchase and use to unlock all your stuff. And maybe this applies to a bunch of people who have Graphene OS that the government is trying to prosecute. So I don't know that this isn't just a mercenary group that did it, but typically when I see forensics group versus like mercenary spyware group, that means somebody who law enforcement has employed to break open a bunch of hardened phones or otherwise like gather evidence in exchange for a lot of money.
Apparently, James has been called by the FBI and the FCC.
Really? I hope to never be called by either of those agencies, except in congratulations for something wonderful I did. Those calls I'll take. All All right. Next up, we have an interesting breach, and this is one that has some twists and turns that Eva was talking about on Twitter. So this is Life 360, which I forgot, honestly, is a company behind Tile. I thought that like Tile was its own company, but I was wrong.
It was until a couple years ago they got bought, I believe.
Yo, okay, that makes me feel like I'm not going crazy. Okay, cool. Yes. Okay, well, that makes sense. Sorry, just checking my battery. Yep, we're good. We're good. All right. So the company behind Tile now experienced a breach, and this was one that exposed a lot of information about customers. Basically, it was like potentially like things that you would need to look up the assets of customers, like on the Tile network, and that apparently was, quote, limited to specific Tile customer support data, and didn't include information like credit card numbers, passwords, login credentials, location data, which is something I was really interested in, or government issued identification number, because Tile customer support platform does not contain these information types. However, all the other information that their support platform did have access to was potentially exposed. So that's going to be names, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, and device identification numbers. So like, what's interesting about this also was apparently a law enforcement portal or something that allowed law enforcement to request data on tracked items was also targeted in this attack. So this was previously kind of unknown, and getting a little bit more of a window into how law enforcement has been able to access this information, and whether or not that portal was potentially involved in allowing threat actors to gain access to this is really the question. Like, we've often said, like, oh, well, you can have like technically legal surveillance that's still like just a bad idea, because potentially it's involved in, I don't know, a data breach where all that information that law enforcement has access to is now open for sale on the darknet. So that kind of seems like it could be a factor of one of the things that happened here, or at least the portal could have been involved in scraping or exposing some data that would or should not be public about Tile customers. So if you are a Tile customer, then this certainly means that some information about you could have been exposed. And while it doesn't seem like telemetry data, like location data, was exposed, it certainly seems as though enough information has been leaked to allow for follow-on attacks. So just some caution advised for people who have a Tile. Interestingly, it does not seem like they are offering free credit monitoring. So I am sorry to say that you are not among the lucky winners this week, of which there are many. All right, so I think that we have covered this topic before, and this is PWAs, which is not something I immediately remembered what they were, but progressive web applications are something that I have seen. So these are web applications that seem as though they are like built-in like software applications on the computer. And in fact, they are crafted web experiences that are designed to make it easy for developers to create like web frameworks to emulate apps that are really just running, like on like pretty normal like web application stuff. So you can like have a URL that this goes to that then creates an experience that looks really legit. So the idea is then you pop up one of these that looks as though it's a corporate login or like a request for login for like your VPN or something, and then you type in your credentials into it. So these look very convincing, and once they're installed, they can make it look like you are supposed to enter your information into this, and even have false information in the address bar. So like the ability to completely change the way that this looks and the customization options, the ability to hide the address bar, really like add to the phishing potential here. And this phishing kit that's been released takes advantage of all of those features to make it look extremely convincing, just like this. To potentially have a fake Microsoft login form pop up.
These things are just getting better and better. I mean, even a couple of years ago, we had a security lab where we ran basically something like this as an example. And even at the time, it was, I'm not going to say it was hastily put together, and it looked good. And these things have just gotten really, really refined. And even some of the advice that we give, like, hey, check the address bar, they're faking it now. So like you kind of get around some of that classic good advice type of thing. So it's an ever increasing arms race.
I really can't see much of a way of determining that this is fake for the average user, because it has all the things that you learn in phishing training. It has the legitimate URL. If this was popping up on the average user's computer, I think they would have a very, very hard time distinguishing this from a legitimate pop-up or something else that, especially on a work-issued laptop, is constantly popping up all the time.
Sure.
All right, so the next story we have is talking about the cybercrime industry in the kind of depth that we've covered before. So we've talked about how there are people who just specialize in initial access and they don't do any of the programming. They effectively use the tools that other people have created to target organizations and attack them. But there are other parts of the cybercrime organization as well. Oh my gosh, we're still using the same stock photo. Come on, bleeping computer, fully go into AI. I've just seen this one so many times. So anyway, criticism aside, the Ukraine cyber police arrested a 28-year-old Russian man who was specifically working with the Conti and Lockbit ransomware operations to make their malware undetectable by use of cryptors. So cryptors, so I cannot tell you, as somebody who used to do a hacking channel, well, I guess I still do, never mind. As someone who used to do nullbyte, how many times the #1 comment was, "Excuse me, sir, how do I make my payload FUD?" I was just like, what? What do you mean? And then I was like, oh, fully undetectable. Like, okay, like, and this is something that's highly in demand. A lot of people like really want a fully undetectable payload. And this operator, I almost hate these arrest videos because they're so dramatic. Anyway, so this person was apparently not involved in the operations of, actually going after people. They were merely involved in the technical creation of cryptors that were specialized in evading defenses. So by holding up that service to threat actors who were attacking multinational companies, including one, I believe it was in the Netherlands, right? I think it was the Dutch cyber police that were in particular mad about this.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, like they're going after the whole operation, including people that don't take a central role in the creation of the malware and might instead just provide a specialized component to the overall machine. So interesting to see these sorts of arrests going after I would say lower level people who are not directly involved in the attacks and instead are working on the technical side of the malware and adding value to the overall product that this whole ecosystem relies on.
If you think about it, though, that makes a lot of sense. It requires a specialized skill to be able to do this, to be successful. And there's only a certain number of people that have that or are willing to sell it out to cyber criminals. So if you take them out, it will have larger ripples because there's always somebody who's willing to click that button. If they bought access, all they're doing is saying, go ahead and deploy something that's been prepackaged. So it makes sense. It's a smart technique to do.
Yeah, like going after the talent behind making the bar for the cybercrime activity like lower and lower and lower is a pretty valid strategy. And it's making it harder for people to maybe want to get into developing cybercrime elements if they don't feel as shielded as they used to. Because typically, if you're just like behind the scenes working on a technical part, while those affiliates are out there actually using the software, taking the risks, you probably feel pretty protected.
Yep.
So, all right, next up, going into the reason why we're going after people like this, there is a major cyber attack against the city of Cleveland, which has shut down their IT systems after a ransomware deployment. Is this a real picture of Cleveland?
I don't know. I mean, the only thing I know about Cleveland is that Cleveland rocks. That's all I know.
All right.
Told me that.
And that's all we need to know. Yeah, so this cyber attack has forced them to take a lot of services offline, and they are now operating on a kind of just like only if it needs to run kind of basis. It seems like it is an ongoing incident. No particular gang has claimed responsibility, which would make sense given that this is pretty hot, and it is a developing incident. So whenever you have something that is taking down critical services or that is making an entire city government unable to operate, like that is the kind of thing that gets generally a federal response. So we'll see more information as this response is ramped up. I'm sure that we'll probably see more details about who is claiming responsibility and trying to negotiate with them. But with a target this large and juicy, it really is up to the calculus of the ransomware group that has taken the risk here. Is it worth it for them to try to get away with this and like assume that they can, you know, launder the money and like do all the difficult stuff? Or is this too big of a target and they're going to walk away, which causes its own problems if the encryption keys are not available? And we've seen that before when like a new ransomware affiliate accidentally took down the transportation system in San Francisco and they were like, oops, and they just walked away.
Right.
All right. Next up, we have more fallout potentially from some of the Snowflake stories we covered. So there was concern that this was a supply chain attack, but it seems as though this was a targeted campaign against Snowflake customers going on for months that was targeting campaigns that did not have 2FA enabled. So this is from Pure Storage, and it was cited as, quote, telemetry data, which I don't totally know what that means. But the exposed information also includes customer names, usernames, email addresses. It did not contain credentials for array access or any other stored information, but as always makes us a little bit nervous just based on whether that telemetry information includes credentials. So typically we talk all the time about how credentials are exposed in this telemetry data, whether it's build files or other things that maybe have access tokens or other things, API credentials. So it is very nerve-wracking for like a cloud provider to like disclose a breach like this when the type of information, the telemetry here is kind of unknown and very general when it comes to like the way that we're being transparent about this. So again, this is tied to the same Snowflake exploitation that we've seen before. A lot of companies are coming forward, and I think we're now in like 165 organizations potentially impacted by this attack. So like it doesn't need to be a supply chain attack for it to be devastating. It just needs to be a good idea, at least for the attackers.
So takeaway from this, turn on your 2FA. If you have Snowflake, check your accounts, do an audit of your system, turn it on.
Yeah. In data enrichment here by the attackers to try to identify credentials to stuff these accounts really seems to potentially have been a factor for this widespread breach and all the companies that are affected here.
Yeah, it's almost super basic. And I know we talk about this and you know, we go into the industry, we're always interested in the new and novel attack, but this dumb stuff like phishing, like credential stuffing, it's still ridiculously effective. Like,
it's just like a very, very low bar for staging an attack. And if it works, the payoff is huge.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So next up, we have an actively exploited flaw in a lot of devices. So this is going to be a lot of like Chromebook and mobile devices. And this is actively being exploited in the wild. It's a use after free vulnerability. And these are Bifrost and Valhalla drivers that could potentially allow arbitrary code execution, which is obviously the worst case scenario, meaning you can just basically do whatever you want on these devices.
Right.
They are aware of exploits of this vulnerability being exploited in the wild. Users are recommended to upgrade if they're impacted by the issue. This is potentially a pretty big deal. They're saying that due to the complexity of the supply chain on Android, end users may get patch drivers with significant delays, and a lot of these devices may no longer be eligible for security updates at all. So what does that mean? Well, we now have a reliable and severe exploit available for an entire class of devices: Chromebooks, embedded systems, single board computers. This is all stuff that is also going into tablets and smartphones. So as long as this is vulnerable, it means that you could potentially take over the device, run arbitrary code, and that is a big deal. So kind of shocking to see so many devices pulled into this one high severity exploit. You can expect this to be weaponized, and as this is patched, you'll still see devices that are vulnerable to this that are not receiving current security updates and probably won't in the future.
Yep. That's the scariest thing with stuff like this, is that a lot of phones, they get produced, dumped on the market, they get patches for a year or two, and that's sort of it. They're just trying to upgrade or speed up the upgrade cycle, I suppose. And the other thing too is a user, an end user, will probably never know if their device is actually affected by it, because most consumers aren't going to be like, oh, what chip am I running in, you know, XYZ smartphone or tablet or whatever it is.
Yeah, especially like, you know, if it's working, then until somebody attacks it or a piece of software exploits this vulnerability in order to load spyware or something, then, you know, they're probably not going to notice it. But it's going to be one of those tools that hackers put in their back pocket because it's going to affect so many devices, and the likelihood that all of them have been patched is so low.
It's going to end up, I mean, if it isn't already, it's going to end up in one of the like off the shelf like attack tools, or Kali or something sooner than later, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's only a matter of time. And speaking of what could possibly go wrong if you just leave a bunch of devices unpatched and offer no further updates, we have Netgear routers that allow full device takeover with no fix available and no fix coming. So if you are a Netgear customer and you are using one of these very, very popular N300 routers, of which I actually think I might have one. There was a bunch of them that were dropped off at the local Goodwill, possibly by someone who had found this vulnerability and no longer wanted it. The device reached end of life, but a lot of people are using it to run OpenWRT and other cool stuff. And as a result, it seems like the sheer number of these is what's raising concerns about these default credentials stored in plain text and WPS setup pin exposure. I have been running WPS setup pin vulnerability attacks for a very long time, and they're very effective.
Yeah,
I would say about 40% of devices of routers are vulnerable to some sort of WPS setup pin attack, whether it's a very, very slow one or a quick, like fast one. This is still a attack vector that a lot of people have kind of forgotten about, and I love that as a Wi-Fi hacker.
Yeah.
So the fact that this is still being used to pop routers and use them for all sorts of nefarious things, that to me is a pretty good sign that this is worth keeping an eye on and making sure that when you're learning about Wi-Fi security, WPS setup pins are still something you know about. And if you have this router, maybe you should replace it. That is the official guidance from Netgear. Consider replacing it with the model that is actively supported by its manufacturer, which kind of sounds like them. So, just like you said, Kilian, speed up the update cycle. You guys are behind. You're still using this old cheap router that works too good. Well, next time we'll make it worse.
Right.
All right. Next up, we have a breach from a fellow cybersecurity company. This is Cylance, which I did not know was bought by BlackBerry? ?
Yeah, I remember. The only reason it sticks in my mind is because they were I think they were kind of close to us at RSA, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And I remember seeing their booth, and I was wondering, like, what's BlackBerry doing here? And then I put two and two together.
Yeah, so this seems like a data breach that is being sold for $750,000, containing customer information such as 34 million customer employee emails? Oh, right. Okay, I thought I was going to say, I was like, if that was email addresses, I was just like, how many customers do they have? Okay, 34 million customer and employee emails and personally identifiable information belonging to Cylance customers, partners, and employees. So the leaked samples appear to be old marketing data, though, used by Cylance, and they are insisting that this is third-party data unrelated to BlackBerry, which is confusingly specific, but all right, but appears to be from 2015 to 2018, predating BlackBerry's acquisition of the Cylance product portfolio. So they're just like, yeah, but, that wasn't us.
Right.
Great, excellent corporate acquisition move. So appears that this could have links to the Snowflake attacks in that this is data that was potentially held in a Snowflake server. The of course concern here is the same as always. Are there potentially credentials, API tokens, like something like that stored in this information? But also just getting that amount of data about the customers of a cybersecurity company is a golden opportunity for some scammers or people that might be looking at going after more hardened targets. All right, so this one's crazy. We talked about this last week, and we were talking about the impact of a ransomware attack on London hospitals after a particular provider was taken down and really had a major impact. So I was talking to someone about an incident where, basically a simulation where they were trying to show at what point a hospital stopped being able to operate during a cyber attack. Like, at what point did the impact reach the level where the hospital no longer was able to impact? And it basically stopped on day one. Like, the simulation plan for shutting down access to the digital charts and making testing results unavailable. And the hospital stopped functioning when they shut down the HVAC system and they couldn't keep the temperature at the levels they needed to. So hospitals are incredibly sensitive places where everything has to be running correctly, and they need access to data vitally in order to do their jobs. It seems as though that the hospitals haven't been able to access testing data, and they haven't been able to access information about the blood that they have on hand for transfusion. So they are currently running short on blood and are requesting donations on an emergency basis because it's just not possible for them to verify the blood type of some of the donors or of some of the blood that they apparently have on hand. That is crazy to me because it means that their operations are being impacted to the point that they're having to plead with the public for blood. Like that is not like a minor thing. And most organizations that might be impacted by a ransomware attack, like, okay, like it might have some impact on some part of the business, especially like, you know, mortgage companies or something might have to accept payments late, something like that. They might lose money. But when it comes to like, you know, organizations that are critical, like a hospital having to ask the community for blood donations because they can't supply enough blood to keep operating, like that is a really critical attack that's going to attract a lot of attention and has kind of been the worst case scenario we've been talking about. These threat actors have been relatively careful in selecting organizations that aren't going to attract like a huge response most of the time. But as they get more bold and as some of these threat actors start going after healthcare specifically, it's going to start getting worse and worse. And we're going to see more of these instances where people actually die as a result of ransomware attacks because the organizations can't stay open and they can't provide life-saving services. And because of the concentration of this market, it seems like this particular IT provider was servicing a lot of different hospitals all in a small area, and taking that amount of hospital capacity offline all at the same time is going to have a huge impact on the community.
Absolutely.
So also in the UK, we have the US and Canada doing a little bit of investigation into the 23andMe data breach. This was the absolutely devastating data breach we talked about where genetic information was stolen in a credential stuffing attack that also exposed the fact that users had the ability to scrape large amounts of data from people who had opted in to data sharing. A lot of people had done this in order to get information about their relatives, and in exchange had put up their own genetic information. And that meant that as soon as threat actors were able to scrape the data of people who had opted into the system, they were able to scrape the data from everybody who had opted into the system. Now, that represents a large amount of incredibly sensitive and kind of unchangeable data that's unprecedented in how sensitive it really is. So the government investigations into these data breaches, I think, is pretty significant, as it could lead to maybe some of the first regulation, or at least some of the first protections for genetic data, as it's uncovered how bad this breach actually was.
Yep. Couple of good points in the comment. Trusty8 talking about running the old software because of compatibility issues. I've seen that. That's and James had a comment because they're afraid to break stuff. Absolutely. Especially if you get into the more regulated environments, they're very, at least in my experience, at least what I've seen and people I've worked with, they are very hesitant to patch anything, upgrade anything, buy anything new, because the system's been validated and regulated, and it's been validated against a certain, you know, like CFR and some other stuff if you're talking about healthcare. And it's working and they don't want to do it. It's difficult to go through the validation process again. It's going to shut down all the different manufacturing or testing or whatever it happens to be doing. So absolutely. And or if it's specialized equipment, I've seen this too, but they go out of business, you can't patch it anymore, but it's running a massive industrial process. I've seen that happen. I've talked to people who face that challenge, to the point where I know some large organizations will put in the contract that you must guarantee that regardless of what happens, you're going to support this, or you're going to give us our money back to buy something else for that exact reason. So yeah, it's a scary sight, especially in places that are heavily regulated, hospitals, manufacturing, healthcare, all sorts of things like that.
Healthcare, incredibly regulated. Like I went to a couple talks at DEF CON talking about the life cycle for like medical devices and medical approved devices, and the amount of 0-day vulnerabilities they accrue before they're able to be like go through the approval process is crazy. And that's because they're not allowed to change anything like while it's going through that process. So even if they discover flaws, they would be basically back to the drawing board. So the entire like way that these things are made and the safety processes they go through kind of in some cases prevent them from applying updates or fixing things that are discovered in the off-the-shelf technology that are involved in these specialized processes. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. And businesses like selling a thing and then going out of business, and then like having this other business, you know, their customers be like, okay, well now we need to have a Windows 95 computer all the time at this patch level, because if we touch it any further, it's no longer compatible, and we can't afford to figure out why. Like just keep it running. forever.
I see that all the time. Like in the rare occasion I'll have to go to a doctor's office, I'm like I know that's 95. I can see the little start bar there. You're not sneaking that by me. Broke Hacker IRL says the last hospital he was at was still running Telnet.
Not surprised. I'm not surprised, you know, because like the IT people at these places often have a very restricted budget. They just need to make things work, and it's not the primary focus. And that's a dangerous combination.
Absolutely.
All right, so next up we have a major data breach. This is the New York Times source code being stolen via exposed GitHub tokens. This is not necessarily a surprise, but it is definitely a shock that it is such a large data breach leaked on 4chan. So this is a 273 gigabyte archive containing stolen data from the company's GitHub repo. Basically, quote, basically all the code belonging to the New York Times company. 270 gigabytes reads the 4chan post. It's a lot of information, and like weirdly, like people are mostly excited about the source code for Wordle.
Yes.
Which I guess was a really, really big deal. I never got on the Wordle game. I guess because I can barely read, but you know, they certainly were protecting that Wordle. This is like what I love about the story is that it draws like parallels and like invites the question that there's a connection with the Club Penguin breach. It's like, were Club Penguin fans involved in the data breach? I love that they're asking that question, and the fact that it is a legitimate possibility that Club Penguin fans have broke bad and are now going on a hacking spree of like corporate data because they weren't able to get the information they wanted the first time over, delights me. I'm not sure if that's the case here, but the Bleeping Computer story certainly frames it as invites you to consider that possibility, which is certainly an intriguing one. So if you're a Club Penguin fan in the chat and you have anything anonymous to disclose, you can always reach me on Signal. All right. So this is crazy to me and a worst case scenario that I could not believe was true. I used to use LastPass, and when I started doing journalist training, I switched to 1Password because they had free 1Password accounts. They recently stopped doing that, as I stringently complained about. However, I have never experienced a 12-hour outage where I'm locked out of all of my passwords.
That's terrifying.
So if you're a password, manager, then your job is to manage the damn passwords, like under any circumstances, right? Like you need to offer them up when they're needed. Otherwise, you've essentially ransomwared someone out of all of, well, okay, not ransom. You've essentially denial of service someone out of all of their accounts because they can no longer get in unless they want to reset all their passwords, which is a pain. So it effectively made it impossible for people to log in with their long randomized perfect credentials that are usually set to good security for 12 hours. So aside from a bunch of people getting the day off, it was surprising to me that the local versions of this were not working for most customers. I don't understand how that possibly happened.
And especially given their explanation where they're like, oh, it was a bad update to the Chrome extension. It was basically denial of servicing our backend servers. That doesn't make any sense, especially for the local one, like you said, because what does that have to do with the other thing? And maybe there's more to it. I mean, obviously there's more to it, but it didn't pass this, the smell test right off the bat. Something's fishy with that.
Super, super weird. Would love to see further explanation on that, but it made me feel like I dodged a bullet there because, as I said, I used to use LastPass, and until they started getting involved in like a bunch of like data breaches last year, I felt pretty neutral about them. Yeah. But this is a pretty bad service outage. So lots of luck to them and their team in getting this fixed. It must have been a stressful day for everyone there, but I imagine a lot of their customers were also quite frustrated not being able to get into their accounts. I also want to shout out, oh my gosh, my formerly favorite, not that one. Do I not have it up? My formerly favorite network scanner. I literally don't know what they're trying to tell me. I'm so curious. Perhaps someone in the chat can give me some understanding. So I use Thing Network Scanner, which allows you to scan your own private network and find things on it. So for me, I use it to find my 3D printer. I use it to find like IoT devices I'm connecting to. And it's a really good service for that. So recently when I've launched it, it says Time to breathe. Thing serves millions of users every day. To ensure fair access to everyone, we may place a cooldown period on scans. You can try again tomorrow or pay us $2.99 a month to scan your own home network. Please, someone in the chat, tell me what's going on. Like, why am I taking away access from some other random person when I'm scanning my home Wi-Fi network? It escapes me. So like I'm all for making money, but like
Sure.
and like I'm they've offered like a number of like useful things like network monitoring and stuff, but like I'm so over it. Like when they start just like making stuff up. So maybe I'm missing something, y'all, but like being told that like me scanning my home network is depriving some user elsewhere of their ability to scan their own home network. Like, no, I don't like that makes absolutely no sense to me. So hey, if you're an Android user and you've got a network scanner that you like that's not Wi-Fi Mon, because I know about that guy, or Wi-Fi Man by like Cisco or whoever makes that one. Let me know. I'm interested. I have been using things since I started writing for Nullbyte, and they've been such a good resource for such a long time. And they've slowly gotten more and more like desperate for like, hey, I know that you're using this, but stop doing that unless you're going to pay us. And like it seems like they've fully have just throttled their service to the point that you just can't use it anymore without like a full like a 24-hour timeout. Like, what are you talking about? So if you're Fing, stop playing. Just tell us if you need the money. Like, I love your service. Like, I'll donate if you need it, but like let's not make excuses here.
I think Trusty Ape's got it figured out. Kody, you're being greedy. Other people want to scan your network too.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't aware that it was everybody else scanning my own network that I was depriving them of. Yeah,
so greedy.
I shouldn't presume. All right. So next up, we have another data breach. Wow. So this is Frontier warning that 750,000 people have had data breaches that has exposed personal information. This is claimed by the Ransom Hub ransomware operation. And it also said that there was some unauthorized access to their IT system that caused some systems outages. So it seems as though probably like a double exploitation attack. Not sure if they paid to have things restored or they were able to restore from backups. But either way, it seems like there was some damage or the data was encrypted. They got it back, and now the data was also breached, and they are reaching out to people to notify them of their free credit monitoring. So one way to spin this is 750,000 Americans win free credit monitoring through no fault of their own.
There you go. What I can't figure out, though, is like, what are they storing your social security number for? You signed up for their cable. Like, okay, maybe they do a credit check on you because I know that happens sometimes signing up for those services. Don't store the information.
They'll store it until the end of time, unless there's like some sort of data regulation. Like that information could be used to tie other things to other things that increase the data they store and sell, and like it will always be for sale until people basically get pissed and the scams get so bad that there becomes laws that restrict the amount of data that these companies can hoard and then have breached. And I think that we're like almost at that point, but like things are gonna have to get really bad before they get better. Like at least the way that things are going when it comes to the types of targeted basically impossible to tell the difference between real scams that people are going to get from businesses they've done business with before, from providers that they've worked with that might pop up with random fees or ask for updated contact information and banking information for their accounts. Like there's just so many scams that could be launched from this data. It sucks. It really does suck.
Yeah. Contact your representative if you're in the US. Tell them to support comprehensive data privacy laws.
Absolutely. I mean, it's worked out really good for Europeans, you know?
No, it has.
So this is a good story. I wanted to wind things down on a good note. So this is Windows deciding to kind of think about their Windows opt-in kind of thing. And this was a result, I believe, in part, the Total Recall tool being released that allowed people to basically extract information. Having AIs that are digesting personal information from people and then potentially leaking that data is a cause for concern. And a lot of people have said that they don't want their information to be used to train an AI, even if that AI is supposedly subservient to them. Although I feel like this AI would probably give me ads all day if I let it. So I don't necessarily trust that it's my buddy. And I don't think it's my friend. So a lot of people felt the same way. And it seems as though the delay is now being implemented for rolling this out. And it will be an opt-in feature, as we were hoping. because yes, there was some scathing reporting from a number of different sources that AI was just being rushed into these products, and it wasn't really being thought about whether or not customers really wanted this or whether it was going to have security implications, which it almost certainly will. All right, so we have another data breach. In this case, it is Truist. Is that how you pronounce it, bank? So this is a relatively large breach, and this is a bank that is headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was formed, I guess, after Sun Trust Banks and BB&T merged. Okay, that's why I've never heard of it. It is now a top 10 commercial bank with total assets of $535 billion. And a threat actor known as Spider is offering to sell stolen information containing basically employee data, 65,000 employees for $1 million online. That's a pretty high price for that information. But the data also allegedly contains bank transactions with names, account numbers, balances, and IVR funds transfer source code. That all could be a lot juicier than the 65,000 employee records. Although certainly trying to get an insider or trying to breach the company further with that information would be a lot easier and potentially worth it for somebody with a financial motivation and a plan for how to exploit that kind of access. So definitely something that we're wondering if it's connected to the Snowflake incidents, because this is the kind of data we've seen breached from other companies. And apparently when asked if it was connected to the ongoing Snowflake attack, the spokesperson said that incident is not linked to Snowflake. To be clear, we have found no evidence of a Snowflake incident at our company. So seems like, at least for now, the incident seems unrelated, according to the company affected.
Well, except for all of these things, or a majority of these stories seem to be all involving the same threat actor, Spider. That person seems to be involved in all of them. So
yeah, we'll see. Maybe Spider's diversified. Maybe Spider's got like a whole other operation going.
A whole web of operations? All right, I'll see myself out now.
All right, so almost done. So we talked about the Ascension hacked last week, and we were kind of curious as to how this happened. This is a large healthcare system that led to a significant data breach, and this was a employee downloading a malicious file onto a company device. Pretty straightforward. This was likely due to a, quote, honest mistake, as the company thought they were downloading a legitimate file. The attack impacted the MyChart electronic health record system, phone systems used to order test procedures and medications, taking devices offline from May 8th, on May 8th, to contain what it described as a cybersecurity event, one of my favorite euphemisms. So these are the kinds of attacks that are impacting hospitals in large, because it forces employees to take track of procedures and basically do or have training on. In the simulation I talked about earlier, one of the biggest problems was that some of the newer nurses were not trained on the paper records. They were trained on the electronic ones. So by switching back to the paper records, they found that a majority of their people were not trained on the procedure for using or accessing or finding those records.
Right.
And as a result, it didn't really matter that they had paper backups. Those paper backups still weren't useful to the people who were trying to run the hospital. So huge mess here in terms of the types of data that were encrypted. And this is, again, some of the most critical data for hospital to continue functioning. All taken down by an honest mistake.
Happens. Still happens all the time.
So I think that's just about all the stories I want to talk about today, except the very worst one, which I saved for last. YouTube is now testing harder to block server-side ad injection in videos, making it more difficult for people to just vibe and listen to some music without having to listen to ads. So YouTube has gone very strict on this recently, and they're trying everything they can to try to get people to pay. At the end of every one of these, it's a comment by YouTube being like, you should just pay. It goes to the content creator. As a content creator for YouTube, as somebody who has like a YouTube channel with like a lot of views, I don't make much money from this. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, but let's just say that I find this annoying. And I, as a Google Fi user, I ended up getting a like free like YouTube premium account. So I haven't noticed this yet, but it has definitely been annoying that they've been going after ad blockers. They've even implemented changes in Chrome to make it more difficult to use extensions to block ads. I absolutely hate ads, and I've gotten used to not hearing them for a very long time. So every time I hear them, it drives me crazy. So yeah, I think a lot of people feel the same way. This is not a popular update, and it seems like an increasing arms race. But injecting the ads directly into the video kind of seems like an obvious move. I'm going to be honest. Like it seems like I don't know why they didn't come up with this like a long time ago. Because if I was going to get around people using an ad blocker, like that is literally the first thing I would do.
Sure. Yeah, it's it's an interesting story. I mean, I'm a YouTube Premium user too because I don't know, I got it free and I've just paid for it ever since. I'm also a big YouTube content consumer, so it works out in my favor. But what bothers me about the whole thing, and this is more of a general rant, is I have content that I've created on YouTube that's not monetized. They still run ads against it constantly, and that bothers me because I'm nowhere near the size to be monetized. But still, it's just frustrating. Like,
yeah, it's like we as content creators are not like, you know, you're not doing us a favor by disabling your ad blocker, like
right, exactly.
Like at least in my case personally. So I feel like this information, you know, should be available to everyone. And if you happen to enable an ad blocker, then that's maybe not any of YouTube's business. But who knows? Like maybe other parts of the business are in need of an extra shot of cash, and they've decided all those ad block employers are the first ones to go. So fortunately, it sucks to end on a bad note, but at least it's a moderate bad note. There's hope because I feel like there's still some ways of getting around this, at least with uBlock Origin, before this rolls out fully. So that is all the news we have to go over this week on the stream. If you enjoyed it, you can support us and let Varonis know you appreciate it and you want us to keep streaming every week by going to varonis.com/Kody. That's Kody. That lets everyone know that you appreciate the stream, and we'll keep doing it twice a week, every week, as long as you keep going to that link. Kilian, thank you for joining us again today. And yeah, we'll see everybody. And if we didn't get to your comments, on Wednesday is when I will have a little bit of time to go over them. Prior to Tour Camp, I think that might be the last Wednesday stream we have. I will try to broadcast from the island, but no guarantees, as I will be just in the middle of nowhere. That's kind of the point. But if any of you are going to Tour Camp, I am excited to go. Hopefully I'll see some of y'all there. And yeah, I'll see everybody next week on Wednesday. And again, if you have a question that hasn't been answered, feel free to leave it on the YouTube channel. I check it every week, and sometimes I cannot put what you people say on the stream, but I do read and react to it. So I appreciate every comment that all of you leave. Kilian, thank you for joining us again, and we'll see everybody next week.
Take care, everyone.
All right, goodbye, everyone.